Hey everybody, it's Sarah and Alex.
Hey guys.
We're late coming in. So it's free coaching Fridays for Primal Fusion, and we're hosting those every Friday just to talk about various coaching topics that come up in our programs. One of them is a lot of these, what do you call them, keywords?
Like emotional responsibility or
Emotional responsibility, but with those like what shadow, trigger, mirroring, projecting, those come up a lot. And so I think what a lot of people they say them, and when we are coaching, we are explaining what's happening when we're discussing emotions and the emotional responsibility. A lot of times they get lost in translation, and we hear people talking about them, and when we were posting about it, we say, I don't think you know what it means when you are saying it. And so, hey Kale.
his comments are always the best.
Self-help books, a box of Kleenex, anything else I need for this? A spoon. You need a spoon. And depends on the flavor of ice cream too. So toppings. Anyhow, we're talking about emotional accountability. We're sharing the screen with you guys, so that's today's topic. Here we go. Scrolling up. So we're going to start at the top. Objective. So with emotional accountability is to be aligned with your thoughts, words, and actions. With working with Paul Check, the two of us, we learned this really cool coaching model. If you can see it on the screen, it's his integration model of when you identify a problem, it's in the gray cloud there. That's the shadow, right? That's the thing that stirs your emotions.
The unconscious.
The unconscious.
What you're not aware of. So you're acting without knowing why you're acting that way.
Right, but you know it's a problem because it's stirring a negative.
Not even know it's a problem, yeah.
But if you know it's a problem because it stirs a negative emotion, right? So you're walking around angry or depressed or anxious or whatever. So there's a problem, whether it's causing you anxiety or, conflicts in your life. There's the cloud, right? And so a lot of people come to do our programs or do coaching to solve a problem, whether it's their weight, their health, relationship issues, whatever it is. That's the cloud. And so in dissecting that, a lot of it ties back to, belief systems and the big one is the emotions, right? The feelings. So when you move into the yellow, that's what?
That's when you bring awareness. So like once you've identified your unconscious behavior, whether it's, I'm angry at this as this thing happens constantly in my life. Well, now you're aware that that's happening. So then you go to what are you going to do about it, and you write down that awareness. And so you go, this happens because, my dad sounded like this, and it gets me upset. And then once you start becoming aware of it, you can start paying attention to it every time it starts coming up.
Mm-hmm. So it's a repeat problem because of this, right? And the reason I can't solve this problem and it keeps happening over and over and over again, and I'm just angry and sad and depressed and I can't solve these emotions and I keep feeling this way, is because of what, and that's when you have the whole list of excuses, and we go back to accountability, right? But why do we feel this way? And when you move into the yellow, it's like, well, what will happen if this, then what will happen, then what will happen, well, this, then what happens, right? Then we get to the problem. And always at the bottom of the list, as, working with our teacher, Paul Check, is it's always death. Death is always at the root of our fears. And so, then you bring the awareness to it, and bringing an awareness to it allows you to clearly define an action step to solving it. And that's, where you move into the green. And that's, moving from the yellow to the green is where it always takes practice,
Yeah,
like lifelong practice.
the green is the hardest part, because the green is, well, now that you're aware that your coworker pisses you off because you have this belief that people should be, fair, and he shows up late, so why can't you show up late? And now you have to practice, well, what's this belief of fairness? Well, now you have, the green is the action item of, what do I do to practice interrupting and retraining my brain and my body to feel this way? And that takes the most work. And most people get stuck at the awareness and don't really practice the green or the integration stage, because I'm going to skip ahead here. And the last step is it becomes a part of you, like tying your shoes. And so you can tie your shoes. I'm sure you guys all can tie your shoes in the dark. I'm sure you could tie your shoes with your eyes closed. I'm sure you could tie your shoes
without thinking.
Being inebriated. I'm sure a lot of people can still put their shoes on and tie them, and it just becomes unconscious, competent behavior, meaning you don't think about doing it anymore. It just becomes another part of your being.
Mm-hmm. Just like in the gray area, the unconscious, incompetent area is, that emotional trigger reaction to be angry about something or ashamed of something or jealous of something, or that's the unconscious incompetence in you, whereas the last step is the unconscious competence. And that's, that getting to that area, it takes so much practice between the yellow and the green, because you have to practice years of conditioning in the unconscious incompetence, right? If you're 35, 45 years old, just now becoming aware of your unconscious incompetence, and you want to become an accountable person to your own emotions and feelings and actions, right? This step can often take years, and there's a lot of people out there who are going and taking trips, to South America or wherever to do ayahuasca, thinking that's the answer, and it's just going to automatically change them, but it's not. There's integration that has to take place.
Yeah.
Awareness is great, and a lot of times plant medicine is a wonderful, tool, and it's a great ceremony and a great process that brings you that awareness. But it's just like going to church on Sundays and taking,
Communion or whatnot.
taking your communion. That's wonderful. You're in awareness and you're cleansing yourself of your sin. But, what good is that if you go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday back to the same patterns and behaviors without integrating what you've just cleansed and become aware of and confessed to? So that's kind of the point of that. And then moving to the next slide. Nope. There we go. So that kind of takes us to the spiritual bypass as an example in talking about emotional accountability and how people tend to avoid the accountability is because it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
What's an example of spiritual bypass? Like in avoiding like, this person hurt me and I'm jealous of them, and they could, I made a mistake and I don't want to admit this mistake because it could make me look bad. So I'm just going to,
here's an easy spiritual bypass. It happens in the medical system constantly. We come up and approach all these medical professionals and say, hey, look, we have all this, potential ways to to get people out of pain and help their lives. But one of the emotional, spiritual bypasses, well, my belief system is set on, I've spent 12 years in college and, post-grad school, and I've been practicing for 20 years. If I accept a new belief, that means I have to go back and look at all the people that I've potentially harmed with all these beliefs. So it's easier to stick to the belief you currently have.
Ooh, that's a good one. Mm-hmm. That's a really good one, because then you have to face.
Yeah, all of those people that you just potentially just gave drugs to, or, that was just like the ways to make money or pay off your debts, and, you got $500,000 in student loans, and it's like, well, I can't, and in your profession, you may have not known that you were going to spend, only 15 minutes with clients or 10 minutes with patients, or even 5 minutes, or maybe not even see a patient, and you're, what was it, PA? No,
Mm-hmm.
what is it called?
Right.
The
Physician's assistant.
Yeah, yeah. So the PA, may look at them, and all of a sudden, the people don't get better, and you're like, well, that's just,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you came in with altruistic, ideas, but all of a sudden, the reality is that's not how doctors function in this society. And so, but there are doctors that go ahead and change their beliefs, and they are making better steps, and they are progressing, and that's an example of how people are integrating properly and moving past these beliefs. But yeah, that's
Blame can also be a spiritual bypass, and projecting that key term, that coin term that a lot of people use. Projecting is another form of spiritual bypass, in a sense, because what's that example you use about the physicians when the surgeons finally found out they need to start washing their hands?
oh yeah, I forgot it was in the 1930s or something like
Yeah.
that. It was there was like the death rate was like 50% in the hospitals, like I think in surgery, and one of the some researcher just found out that most of the people are dying from bacteria. So if we just wash our hands, then people would die less. And then
In surgery.
and it took 30 years until the old thinking, all the old surgeons that didn't want to adapt to the new way of practicing, started implementing washing their hands. And then I forgot what it was after that, but it was a significant. It was like over 30 or 40%
Yeah.
difference.
It took 3 decades for them to, all come on board with you got to wash your hands before you cut somebody open and dig into their bodies, right? And then looking back on a lot of the studies and a lot of the medical work and clinical research that was done, back in those years and those decades. A lot of they don't talk about that. They talk about the reason that the survival rates improved were vaccines and pharmacological improvements. They don't mention that physicians and surgeons started washing their hands.
And I don't even think that's only surgeons. I think it was just contamination. I think it's just
Yeah,
practice in
yeah.
general.
Yeah, sterilization and hygiene.
Yeah.
So that is a big, I like when he taught me that was a big example of spiritual bypass, and how we, rather than becoming accountable of our own, not only our actions and our emotions, that's we tend to avoid the pain of that and bypass it by pointing the finger to something else. And so, going back to the first slide that we had showed you, it's aligning your thoughts and your words and your actions. When they're not aligned, your whole life is just crooked and all over the place. You have to keep up with wearing so many masks that now you don't know what story you're telling who you're with and what group, at work, at home, at the gym, at your social clubs, or at church. You have to put on a new mask everywhere you go, and now you can't keep up with who you are, and after 40-50 years, like, you've lost your identity and you don't even know who you are. And so at what point do you even know what thoughts are yours, and the words coming out of your mouth, are they even yours, and your feelings? So that's where accountability is so important, because and how it can be so painful for people to be accountable is because they're not aligned, and it's so hard to get there.
And that model that we showed you is can be used for anything that's causing you pain in your life, whether it be mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, because the beauty of it is there's always an underlying unconscious behavior. So when to kind of walk you through it is, if someone is in a bad relationship or in a great relationship, and maybe they're struggling with something in their life that their partner is trying to communicate with them, and when you identify the unconscious behavior, and it's like, what's the unconscious behavior? Oh, I yell at my wife every time she tells me to do something. And then, well, now that you have the awareness, I get angry when something is brought to my attention that, but what's the unconscious or what's the awareness behind that? Oh, well, my mother used to nag me constantly, so I'm projecting onto my wife that she's like my mother. Well, what's the integration? She's not my mother. And then you start going into, okay, practicing that, even if you say have to say a mantra or whatever, there's a lot of different coaching steps to do it depending on, this is just an example. And then eventually what the integration is, once you practice it, you don't have to go to the next one, which is the conscious or unconscious competence phase. You become that, and you no longer have anything left to integrate. You just start, every time your wife or your partner gives you something to do, you just act without any build up and hesitation. And
yeah, you hear it without that emotional trigger, without that emotional reaction, because you've healed that pain of your mother constantly telling you what to do because she never accepted you and she never approved of you, or she was always telling you how wrong you were, or nothing you did was right. And so anytime you hear your wife or girlfriend asking you to do something, or asking if you had done something yet, it just triggers that memory as a child that, like, it's never good enough. It's never good enough. And that emotion is stored inside of you. And so immediately you project that onto her because she is the female version of your mother. And you can't hear or receive her words without hearing and reliving that feeling of never good enough until you heal it. And so she's suffering that as long as you're suffering that. And so as long as you continue to suffer that and not heal it, you're forcing her to suffer it. And so that's what projecting is.
And another way you could use that model is, I keep getting hurt in the gym. Very easy one. Well, unconscious behavior is, I keep doing the same thing, and then you look at their form and you go, well, your form's terrible. Well, now you've taken that unconscious, behavior and you've made awareness. Form needs to improve. Well, integration is practice better form, and maybe you need to get coached or some soft tissue work, or you need to get your body realigned, whatever the case is. And then once you start practicing that, and then the unconscious competence phase is, you just are lifting with better form and you're less injury prone. And so it can be applied to anything in your life that you have pain in. And that's kind of the spiritual accountability that we need to take. And I guess we're talking about emotional accountability, but
it all stems back to emotions. I mean, because even talking about injuries in the gym, I mean, we've had people who, well, you got to do this, you got to get somebody who's going to watch your form in the gym, and they don't want to do it because they don't want to feel like they're being judged. So they don't do it. So they would rather continue to get injured because they don't want to feel like they're being judged. They don't see it as a way to improve. They see it as a way to be shamed and judged. So that's, that you've just uncovered another thing that they need to heal. And that's another.
And that's really prevalent in the fitness world. If you're a trainer, you've just become an expert. And no expert needs help because they know better.
Yeah.
But, we coach coaches, and, we need coaching ourselves. I can't see myself when I'm doing a horse stance and my shoulder blades aren't retracting properly. It may feel like I'm doing it, but so it's always good to get outside perspective. And so, but that's part of the
coaches are some of the hardest ones to face accountability, because that's part of the ego and identity is to be the one who knows it all. And often we see a lot of coaches in the gym and or posting online, and we'll reach out to them and tell them, like, you got to watch out for your client. That thing you posted, that's going to hurt them, and it drives emotions up in them. And we work very hard to show them some compassion and send that with very delicate, sensitive ways, but we see things that can be very, very dangerous. And so sometimes we'll just take pictures of ourselves or videos of ourselves working out, because we know that we're not perfect either. So like even me, eccentric loading versus concentric loading, I will show like how my form can be perfect eccentric, but like it struggles on the concentric load. And I'll throw myself under the bus just to show you. Like, it's very important to have someone watching you all the time. So that, in being accountable, sometimes as the coach, to inspire others to be accountable, show yourself being accountable. But that means being raw and open. And so other ways of bypassing that is, like we had mentioned earlier, is using substances and drugs, or communion as a way of like a ceremony to practice spirituality, to be spiritual, to heighten your awareness and expand your spirituality, but not integrating it. And so if you don't integrate it, what happens? I mean...
Yeah, you become your living shadow and you start unconsciously living it, And so, like, I forgot what example I was just about to use. When you switched the screen on me.
Oh. You become your living shadow. If you're going into a ceremony, or if you're going into communion to confess of a sin, or it's revealed to you what your shadow is.
Yeah, it's kind of, maybe if I just start talking about like the whole like the woke scene, how everyone's woke now, and I feel like I've had so many people when I add some input on Facebook, just as like a quick little, hey, here's my 2 cents, and I'm going to get out of this argument because I'm not trying to be 2 hours deep into this Facebook discussion, because it's not really that important to me. I just want to make sure that I provide something for the readers to read. And then I've had people on Facebook or ask me if I'm woke. Well, someone that's woke won't ask another person if they're woke. And that's another example of spiritual bypass, because what they're doing is they have a slight a bit of awareness on, whether it be a conspiracy that they found out, or they found out something about themselves, or they took mushrooms and all of a sudden, they had a glorifying experience, an awakening experience, but then they go back to, doing everything that they're doing before without integrating anything. And then when their life gets bad enough, or more mushrooms show up in their life, they do it again, and it's just this constant like, well, I'll just keep doing this until I get better, without any action steps to it, or actually, consistently practicing what you're, especially not, it's one thing for us to tell you something, but it's one thing for Great Spirit to tell you something, or the medicine to tell you something, and you not listen, because that's even a higher vibration than another person can provide for you, and that's just even more offensive. Which is why, if you don't practice integrating these things, medicine or not, and especially if you're aware of it, it's going to cause even more pain, because that's how the pain teacher works. It'll keep giving you more pain until you get it. Meaning, if you're in a relationship that's, your spouse says, you're disorganized and you need to be more organized, and you're like, forget it. So then you break up with her or him. And then you get another relationship and they say the same thing, and then you're just like, forget it. And you do another one. Well, how many painful relationships do you need before you stop attracting the same message into your life? And how many people you've completely let go of because of stubbornness or ego, because you didn't want to
fold your clothes,
or provide assistance to your spouse, because that's kind of the underlying message is, I need help, I need assistance, can you please help me? And so how many more people are you trying to avoid? And that's not including if you have kids. That's a whole other,
Yeah, that's a whole mess.
Yeah, and so...
Not the kids, but...
Yeah, if you're having kids with multiple people and not being accountable for what people are telling you that you need help in, and that just becomes your whole living shadow, and look at all these people you end up hurting, and these kids you end up hurting, and then on top of that, you're going to be the one that's end up hurting the most, realizing they have to live with all this pain that you've hurt all these different people, and, it gets real painful. And then the pain teacher is not bound to time, so it'll just hang out until you're ready to learn, and it could be on your deathbed, and hopefully it's not. But how many people they say in their dying wish what they regret the most? Well, that's the pain teacher saying, you ran out of time, what do you regret the most? And so it becomes a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, so we talk about that a lot because a lot of our, Alex's patients or my clients, work with programs, ask us often about what we think of plant medicine or ayahuasca ceremonies, and you know, we don't have strong opinions. We just caution that we know enough about them to say that if that's something you choose to do, or if you choose to do, you know, illuminating, quote unquote, drugs, to understand that if you're presented with any sort of illumination from them, that's your soul giving you information. That's guiding you in a way that if you don't take that information and integrate it into your life, just like going to church on Sunday and taking communion and praying and receiving the scripture, receiving the word, going Sunday is not enough. You got to do it every day. You got to live that word. You got to live that life. If that's your belief, if that's your creed, you got to live that creed every day. Otherwise, your thoughts, words, and deeds are not aligned. You can't go to church and be a goody two shoes, and that's enough to get you into heaven. If that's what you believe, then you're very crooked, right? You got to be aligned and balanced. If you think that you can take some mushrooms or ayahuasca one weekend and be awake or enlightened, you're misinformed. You got to take that into the day after, the months after, the whole year, and integrate what you've learned and to being a better human being. Otherwise, you're the living devil.
There's
of yourself, shadow.
There's even like a joke, and so when we talk about Christianity and practicing that, is if you actually practice it properly, it could work out. But a lot of times it's commercialized, to get you to come back or spend money, and I don't want to get too deep into that. But and the reason why I say that is to kind of talk about, there's a joke even that talks about this whole thing about it's almost like highlights spiritual bypass. Is when I was a child, it was this person saying, when I was a child, I prayed for a bike, and I prayed for a bike, and I never got a bike, and until I realized how Christianity works, so I stole a bike and I begged for forgiveness.
That's spiritual bypass.
That's
for sure.
Spiritual bypass.
For sure. And full disclosure, I'm a Christian. And, I experienced this, all my years as an adult after having children, going from one church to another and not feeling like I was just looking for a community, and I just couldn't fit into church communities because, I'd go to church just thirsty for some, satiation of knowledge and wisdom and growth, and it was often just a lot of coffee cake and coffee and gossip and following a very inspiring message, mind you. Lots of them have great pastors and great messages, but the groups and communities just often had, outside of Sunday, just cake and goodies and gossip and cliques, and it was spiritual bypass to me, and it didn't feel good. Yes. And it was difficult for me to grow spiritually. So what I'm saying is thoughts, words, deeds should all be the same. They should all be aligned. Practice every day what you do every day, and keep it streamlined, keep it going, and be the same person at work and at church and at home and with your friends and at the gym. Be the same person, so you don't have to.
Yeah, and here's another one. I mean, it's just in case you didn't get it. Here's another one.
These are fun.
Thanksgiving. You give thanks and appreciate what you have. What is it followed by? Black Friday, where we discount everything, and you just spend all your money because the stuff that you had yesterday wasn't good enough.
Yeah, so you could give it to your family and friends on the day that Christ was born. Right? It's just all convoluted. Yeah, Jesus. The birth.
Thanksgiving?
No, the Black Friday. Everybody gets all their Christmas presents on Black Friday to give on Christmas Day. Yeah, it's all, yeah, that's, commercialized.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's out of control, y'all.
Yeah.
Out of control. That's right. So the next one, we kind of went through this. So basically, the whole reason thoughts, words, deeds, thoughts, words, actions, they important for them to be aligned. So like looking behind what they are, thoughts, words, and deeds. Your thoughts come from what your beliefs are, like which manifest your feelings and emotions, right? Your beliefs are your like standard set of programmed subconscious and conscious narratives. But a lot of the ones that are important are the ones we're not aware of. Those are the, like, when you're a kid, 0 to 6 years old, you have a tape recorder playing that's literally just recording everything around you all the time. And as parents, I have 3 children. Alex and I have a daughter together, and he's stepfather to my other oldest 2. And we're always aware of that. Anything that we're saying, doing, our kids have tape recorders going all the time. I mean, especially Kelly, the 9-year-old, man, like, you think she's not listening. She's a Gemini, so just like things just kind of like always over her head. But like a year later, she can just like play back something that, and you're like, what? Seriously, these things they follow you your whole life. So those are the important things, the beliefs that are,
Yeah, and part of
unconscious.
One belief, just on the topic of what you're saying, is just being a new parent to infant and now a toddler, and I've heard other parents say like this is a belief, and well, that's actually the words that they use. Your kid won't remember anything. Well, what's the underlying belief? Well, I just don't want to pay attention to what I'm saying around my kid because I just want to be whoever I want to be, whatever I want to be, and just because they won't talk back or repeat back all the nonsense I just said, and they just act that way. Well, that's not true because, they are our divine reflection. And so they find out later in their lives how much that actually isn't true. And, they'll bring up, fights that you had when they were 2.
Right, they do. And they may not remember what you say, but they remember how they felt.
Mm-hmm.
Those are huge. And we're finding this out even with my 12-year-old now. Like, it impacts them a lot. They may not recall like vivid memories of words. Even she does, but they remember how they feel. And infants and toddlers, they may not be able to communicate, but they store memories of those emotions.
Yeah, like here's an example of how this model kind of plays out. Is easy one that I'm sure everyone watching and will watch that's, I guess, 15 or 16 or older will understand this. Is like when you're driving a car and what ends up happening is someone cuts you off. There's a couple ways people react. Usually it's get pissed off and use some unpleasant words, and it'll ruin their day for a while. Well, the thoughts behind that is, well, that wasn't fair. Why did he cut me off? Almost caused an accident, when really you could have not caused an accident. It was just you just didn't feel that was that was justified or deserved. The thoughts behind that is. Yeah, let's turn that down. Thank you. What was I saying?
I had that on mute. I'm sorry.
It's okay. What was I saying?
It's not fair. Yeah, those.
Oh, so it's not fair. But then at the same time, that person will cut other people off and be like, "Oh, I have a reason. It was I'm late for work, or I got to pick my kid up." They'll understand, but the belief behind it is fairness. So if the belief behind it is fairness and you truly believe in it, bringing it into the awareness stage, going, I'm participating in a double standard of fairness where I can cut people off, but they can't cut me off. And then here's the actions behind it. So the belief has to change, or you have to act on your belief. Fairness is fairness. So if I can cut people off and saying it's because of this reason, and if people cut me off, then practicing, they must have a reason. Not just because they looked at me and they realized, that looks like a terrible person. Time to swipe in front of them and ruin their day, which I'm sure has happened to people. I'm sure someone has gone by and it's happened. I'm not excluding that. But there's a belief that led to something happening to them, and then a deed or words and deeds that came after that. And so the underlying belief have to be addressed. Oh, I believe in fairness. Well, that has to be applied all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
Or you just get madder and more mad until one day some guy pulls you up and knocks into you, or pulls you,
Mm-hmm.
stops at a stoplight and then, knocks your head in, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I'll never do that again.
Then that's mirroring.
Yeah.
That's where, people kind of they misunderstand what mirroring is. So if you're not aligned with thoughts, words, and actions, the world will mirror back to you where you're misaligned. And so that would be an example of mirroring. So if you're, that's not fair, but you're kind of being, you're not aligned with that, but, you're mad at somebody for cutting you off, but then you're cutting people off, and then one day you get sideswiped. That is the universe mirroring back to you where you are misaligned, where things are not, where it's showing you where you need to do your work. It's just like mirroring, the world mirrors back to you. If you eat a sick animal, it's going to make you sick.
And here's how it goes even further. If that happens to you enough, there's survival archetypes, and one of them is a victim. Well, what happens if that guy finally pulls you over, or that guy road rages, or some person road rages into you? Mm-hmm. What ends up happening is, why did that happen to me? And now all of a sudden you fall into the victim archetype, and now you start living that out, considering that you probably have been enough for the world to reflect back to you that you're in that current state. Mm-hmm. And then you're stuck in this another even stronger spiritual bypass, which is, why is the world doing this to me? You know? But really that could have happened way before, when you were a child, of learning how to be a victim, because everyone goes through it. Everyone does. And, your brother beats you up, or, punches you, and you go tell mom, and then they get in trouble, and you go, wow, I just learned how to, if I tell on them, they get in trouble. That sounds awesome. And so that he may threaten you, or they may threaten you, and you go back and, threaten to tell mom, and then play victim. And then that unconsciously will act out in your life until, unconscious, this road rage incident could be a huge wake-up call. And so a lot of people will do that. They'll, show up to work late and be like, why did they fire me? Or they'll show up when not in dress code, or they'll, make sexual remarks at work, even though they're really uncalled for, and they're told to you they're uncalled for, and you're just like, and then you get fired, and why did this happen to me? I only said this thing, but it's like you're missing the point because someone's beliefs were being stepped on, and you didn't have enough awareness to acknowledge that and change that in yourself.
Mm-hmm. And the victim, becoming into the victim archetype is the hardest one to change, because when it comes to being accountable, because it's so painful. You've had something terrible done to you or upon you, and it's, it's very hard to face your responsibility in something that has been done to you, or something that has been caused to you or inflicted on you, that's caused you trauma. And I've been there. I've gone through it, and it took years and years and years for me to come to that realization that I was inviting that into my life. And I can tell you, though, and those years that I was in that victim mode were probably the most painful years of my life, because not only was I just feeling sorry for myself, if you're looking at the screen, I was dealing with most of these emotions on the far left: sadness, grief, anger, shame. I was jealous of people who didn't go through what I went through. I was judging people. I was in remorse. I hated men. I had contempt towards men, and I projected that onto my then husband. I had very little patience for women, going back to judgment. I was always worried and anxious constantly, and I had very subtle low-lying depression. I literally had everything on that left side as the victim, because I didn't want to acknowledge how I continually invited that into my life. And it wasn't until I had that realization, that moment of enlightenment, that literally set me free. And that's why being accountable is just so, so, so important. Because when you are accountable, there's no shame in it. There's absolutely no shame. There's no, it doesn't, you're setting yourself free. No one's going to judge you. No one's going to make fun of you. No one's going to put you down and be like, well, oh my God, why did you? No. And if they do, you know what? So what? They have their own process to go through, and that's okay. And that's a step for them to go through, and you're moving on, right? But it's so freeing. There's so much freedom to get past that step, and be accountable and take that responsibility. Once I realized how much I was putting out into the universe, and it was just mirroring it back to me, and how much I just emasculated men and, put them down and put them in that position to just and specific men who were wounded, who had very wounded masculine, right? I emasculated them further, and it triggered that in them. It triggered that outrage so much that it would cause that trigger to inflict violence on me. And then, I'd fall into the victim. And then I'd be angry because it just happened again, right? And then, why me? Why me? And it wasn't until I realized my own behaviors and my own attitude towards men was the very thing that was inviting it into my life. That's the mirror. So becoming accountable is the one thing that broke that chain. And really, I'm in between the yellow and the green. I'm constantly practicing because I tend to be a more masculine woman, and I have to constantly practice my femininity and becoming aware of and acknowledging my femininity and accepting my femininity.
And if you want to play a game of a little kind of and then a little sidestep, but your friend invites you and tells you about their great psychedelic experience and how it freed them from all these things, and then you go and you aren't even aware of all your unconscious behavior or any, and you're like, my life is great, and maybe it isn't, but that's the way you're sealing. You've established how good you feel, right? Because you don't really know how bad you feel because you kind of get used to it. And so you've kind of just accepted this is where I'm at. And so you go take some psychedelic medicine and it shows you all of these awarenesses. So now all of a sudden you have to deal with all this stuff. Mm-hmm. But you don't have the space, nor tools, nor willingness to do it. So now you are
in a sober state.
So now you are even pushed down the hole even further, and it may happen to you more. Mm-hmm. And so this medicine that you took that was going to highlight these shadows that you need to work on, well, if you didn't have the willingness to do it before and you were just talked into it by a friend or,
you thought it was cool.
Yeah, or, you heard someone else say it.
And all your friends on Instagram are doing
it. And it's just going to cause even more pain in your life because now you're aware that you're causing pain in your life, but you don't know what to do about it, nor do you want to change.
And so that's where you go into the middle section here where the fueling reactions to what stirs your emotions. And when you're aware of them and you've got these fueling reactions to these emotions, right? Isolation, avoidance, outbursts, violence, blame, excuses, self-harm, self-sabotage. And those can, you got subcategories under these, right? Self-harm could be anything from cutting to
overeating,
overexercising, undereating, overtraining. Yeah. Not taking the advice of your coaches, right? I've done that. He's done that for sure. Not taking the advice of your wife or husband. All right.
Yeah.
Self-sabotage. Yeah. Same thing, eating what you shouldn't, not drinking enough water when you shouldn't, abusing others, sabotaging others to avoid accountability. You know, that's a big one. A lot of people, in order to avoid accountability because they don't want to face the shame of stepping up to, you know, their own, you know, quote unquote failures, they will sabotage others, throw other people under the bus, or
undercut opportunities, or
yeah,
you know, the friend will come up and say, "Hey, I have this great opportunity," and you guys are in the same field, so that friend goes and gets it first, and then now your friend doesn't get, you know, the opportunity to do that, so, or not. Well, you would be the person that doesn't get the opportunity in that case. But yeah, it happens very often. So if you're not, you know, that's why you got to be careful who you surround yourself with, because you know you're the product of your 5 closest friends. So if you're around people like that and you're unconscious of it, you're in that environment. So that's going to be on top of you. And so if those are your friends, that should be right there a awareness moment to go, I think I'm spiritually bypassing because these are the people I hang around with. Now, if you're in a place where you're aware and you want to help them, that's a different story, right? Because then you could have friends that are in need of help and you're willing to assist them. But most people are not really aware that who their friends are actually bringing them down, or they get caught up in behaviors that they don't want to be even a part of, or, you know, go out late drinking and you're like, you have work tomorrow morning, you have training tomorrow morning, you have, you know, you have to go to your kids, you know, breakfast with dad's lunch tomorrow, and you know you're just like too hungover to even pay attention, and maybe you show up but you're not really present. And you know why? Because you didn't have a dream to, you know, you don't have a solid dream, and your beliefs weren't in line with your actions, and these things funnel into experiences that you have, and how you experience things dictates how you further act. And so
yeah, thoughts, words, actions. I mean, if you're not aligned, I mean, and even just not you, if you want to be accountable about who you align yourself with. Not only just your thoughts, words, and actions. Think about your environment and who you surround yourself with. And if you notice, because a lot of times if we're not able to hold ourselves accountable and it's difficult, like Alex and I will, you know, bounce off each other, because when I'm having a hard time with myself or my health, you know, full disclosure, I'm struggling with my health right now because, you know, I'm so busy and I'm juggling motherhood, some health stuff, and, you know, we've got some transitions with our private practice, and I'm just kind of like, I've got, you know, 12 burners going all the time. And, you know, it's hard for me to see myself objectively because it's me. So, you know, Alex will always say, like, well, if you were your client, what would you say? Right? So using that as an example, if you can't see yourself objectively, look at the people you surround yourself with. And are they aligned? You know, are their thoughts, words, and actions aligned? Take a really good look at that and hold yourself accountable to that. Because if the people you're surrounding yourself with are not aligned with their thoughts, words, and actions, there's probably a very good chance that you are not as well. And so that's a good way to kind of have a free class and a free coaching session for yourself, is to take notes. Where are they misaligned? Where are they crooked in their thoughts, words, and actions? Where are they crooked in how they act at their job, or what they post on social media versus how they behave at home? Or, you know what I mean? Like, take notes and then look at how they contrast to your own life. And that's probably a very easy way to look at and reflect on yourself and understand and be accountable for your own actions. That picture down there is a running joke between Alex and I, that I think we had that like a few years ago, because when we first met, we didn't know each other very well, and we kind of jumped into this relationship after a really, really strong connection, and getting to know each other and blend a family and have a baby and merge our practices together has been one of the greatest, most painful spiritual growth experiences ever. I don't recommend it, but I mean, unless you have the stamina and strength,
willingness, and the people that are willing
and
to
the
stick
support.
through it, yeah.
But a lot of times that's like what our arguments were like. It was like we were just arguing with the back of our own heads at each other, And in the very beginning, it was almost comical.
Here's an example of just even some of our fights. It would be one person would bring up a topic, of discussion, and then 6 months later, the other person would bring up the topic back to that person, and we never really addressed the topic until we realized what we were doing is reflecting back at each other. So at one point, I'm just for an example, Sarah would tell me this bothers her, and then 6 months later, I would tell her the same thing that bothered her, and that bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that's the same thing. It's just the divine mirror.
Just recycled.
Yeah, until one of us is like, wait a second, it bothered her 6 months ago. What's happening? It's like, oh, here we go. It's the mirror that's not really being addressed.
Bitch. No,
yeah.
It was just like showing back to him the experience that I had before, and then but then when he would bring it to me, it's like, well that's what I said.
No, that's not what I meant.
Oh, that's not.
No, I meant like when you came back to me. I don't know. You don't put your socks away. I don't wear socks, so it was an easy one.
You used to though. You used to leave them in the living room floor in the middle. But
anyway, I don't you don't put your socks away. So then I see 6 months later, Sarah's not putting her socks away. So now, even though that didn't bother me before. That didn't bother me at all. She could leave her stuff anywhere in the house, but because she brought it up to me and I didn't address the shadow, now I'm living the shadow by now being pissed off about something that I didn't care about previously. That didn't bother me. So there's a prime example of living out your shadow until you recognize going, why do I even, you have to look at the belief and go, why do I even care about this? I'm like, oh, I'm neglecting her needs by not addressing what she asked me in the first place. So now I'm starting to be upset about the things that are making her upset. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, but both cases are true.
Yeah. Well, now I don't wear socks, so now we avoided that problem altogether.
He used to though when he came from Chicago. Well, when you would do Tai Chi in the backyard.
Yeah, when it's 26 degrees outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, anyway, we'll breeze through this because this is a big part of our programs is understanding. So the thoughts, emotions, and actions is where a lot of people really focus in on. But what you have to really understand is beliefs and values are like the root cause of the disease, right? So if you're crooked or misaligned, the beliefs are like the root cause of the disease, okay? Like it's the root cause of the misalignment.
I mean, like here's an easy example of a belief. And if you think that if you sin and you go to hell forever, no matter what you do, you will always feel shame for that one thing that you did wrong. If your core belief that you learned as a child or even as an infant, unconsciously you programmed that into your system, whether it got programmed in, no matter what you do, unless you change that belief, every time you do something that you believe is wrong or you're told is wrong, that unconscious drive will drive all your actions and then your emotions and your thoughts. Oh shit, I'm going to hell. Oh, worry, anxiety about going to hell. And then your actions are going to speak of, whether you retreat or you try to externalize all those problems by helping other people. But the desire to help other people isn't out of love. It's to getting good with God so you don't go to hell. Mm-hmm. Right? Do you see how that kind of plays out? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, so when we work with, clients that are, Christians, now just to be clear, like we've studied several books that, well, I'm Christian, I grew up Lutheran, and I absolutely, like, full disclosure, I love Christianity and I love everything about Christianity. I just, will be honest, I don't love a lot of Christians. And that's not to be like, well, I love everybody. I just don't love a lot of what many Christians kind of convolute the religion that I love.
You see the shadow.
It's the shadow of it that kind of ruins it, my experience of Christianity for me. And so but Christianity isn't the only religion, and we got to be honest about that. So we study all world religions. And what we try to understand when we work with clients is that their core language is going to be based on what religion they were brought up on. And if you were born and raised in America, no matter what religion you are, even if you were raised in a family that was agnostic, atheist, our political systems and education systems fundamentally have subtle core Christian values and language. So everybody has a Christian fundamental narrative. And so they have that programming. And so we study that programming. We study those narratives to understand the narratives of our clients. But we do understand all world religions.
Yeah.
And so when we do with the sin, avoiding sin so you don't go to hell, I've studied the Gospels of John, Luke, Peter, Paul, and Thomas. And Thomas is not in the Bible, but the difference between John and Thomas is that like their accounts are all very similar. But what John is saying is that you have to behave a certain way, otherwise you'll go to hell, and you have to be baptized in order to be washed of your sin. And so what Thomas is saying, who similar times spent time with Jesus and was there before the Last Supper, through his death, what he's saying of his account and understanding from his experience with Jesus and speaking with Jesus is that to know God is to know yourself. And to be washed of sin is to actually go to hell and rise up from hell. So to understand and be cleansed of sin, it means to go through hell. It means to literally understand your darkness, understand your shadows, and then just stop doing that shit. That's what Thomas said he understood from Jesus, is to understand what your shadows are, what the, quote unquote devil is speaking into you and trying to tempt you with. And you as a human being are going to be tempted with all of these things, but it's your job to grow as a human being into being a better human being. And that is when you have been washed. That's when you have been baptized. That was Thomas's account. And the Apostle John had a different account, but the language is so similar. And so anyhow,
there's a saying. It's like, and that's all metaphors to kind of give you the understanding of, hell is really nearby, and it's between your left and your right ear.
Yeah.
And so if you get that understanding, it's where your beliefs, where you think about them all the time, are in here. And so when you understand what your beliefs are, and you can go through that hell, you come out just a better person, because you understand that everyone's a reflection of you. So you hurting other people is just nothing more than you hurting yourself. But it's all a process that we go through. And I wasn't brought up, I was brought up with a couple different religions, and my parents are different religions, but I was never pushed into one, so I was just curious about them all. And so, I come under the understanding of, especially being with Sarah, who loves the Christian faith and religion, and looking at it from a point of anyone can get to know themselves or get to know God, because God has no one religion that he is, or he is just an easy way of me saying God, or she, yeah. Well, God doesn't have a sex, but the God, just mirrors himself, just mirrors himself into different faces, so you can coexist with other people, so you can get past your own beliefs and do what's important to you. And that's how, once again, it's learning about how everyone practices their own way of faith, and when does it get in the way of their actions? When do their beliefs get in the way of their actions? Because if, easy example of, like a Catholic, when you're telling other people gay marriage is wrong, but then you catch a Catholic sleeping with some boys, you're like, yeah, that doesn't align.
That's kind of crooked.
It's crooked.
Yeah. And, so that's why we always look at the root cause of the misalignment, the belief systems. And so the childhood programming, we want to dig into what were your experiences and your family and your living situations and your life like between age 0 and 6, right? Because that's your programming. But your beliefs are not only your unconscious narratives; those are kind of the most important ones because that's what you want to raise to the conscious. But they also are your conscious narratives. So when you raise your unconscious narratives to the surface, and then you compare them to your conscious narratives that you are aware of, you're gonna see like a huge contrast of like disparity there of like, oh, okay, so this is what I actually consciously think, but this is like the opposite thing that's playing in the background all the time, driving my emotions, right? So I actually think it's totally okay for my girlfriend to be liking guys' pictures on Facebook. That's totally fine, but for some reason it makes me feel jealous, right? That's a difference in belief systems, like the unconscious narratives and conscious narratives. So that's why we always look at the root cause. And then you go forward, your values. Did it hit a set of core values, principles, and so on? And then you move the train forward, right? So anyway, we're going to wrap it up. That kind of is like why we focus so much on accountability and emotional intelligence in our programming. And we focus on the 4 things. What's your state of happiness? How can we elevate it? What's your performance level? How can we improve it? What's your nutrition level? How can we improve it? How is your rest and recovery? Is it enough? How can we stabilize it? And so all within that is about accountability. Be accountable for your health, be accountable for your nutrition, be accountable for getting to bed on time, be accountable for changing your behaviors, be accountable for being nice to your wifey, be accountable for telling your husband he's amazing and sexy and supportive and you love him when you should, just accountability is in all parts of your life. So that's it. That's a wrap. And thank you, everybody, for checking us out. And we will see you soon.
Yeah. And if you have questions, like, are we still live?
Mm-hmm.
And if you have questions or topics that you want us to talk about, feel free to like comment on it. And right now, I think we're going to do this free coaching Friday like once a month. I think we discussed.
Yeah, once a month or every other.
Yeah, and if it gets more popular and we get more topics and more awareness or more discussions going, so we can talk about more. We'll probably do them more often. But right now, just based on our availability and time, and just because we want to share it with everybody, so right now we're just going to do it once a month.
Yeah. So send in your questions if you have any topic things that you want, like you're curious about or you want answered. This was fun. So, all right, we'll see you in a few Fridays.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Be accountable. Love you.